that beautiful city to travel to London. She did so when she was only a little older than Evangeline Coupe. And like each one of you here, she loved to write. For a decade, she wrote poems, stories, and reviews of plays.
Behind Camilla's elegant bookshelf lay a secret no one in the royal family ever expected. For years, it was just another wall. Until a quiet renovation uncovered something that left even the most composed royals stunned. Hidden away, untouched, and cloaked in silence, this discovery sent whispers racing through palace halls. What could be so powerful, so unsettling, that it shook the monarchy to its core?
It's really got them reading. I mean, properly reading. They are bookworms now. It's so lovely. If I go and see them, I find them tucked up in bed, with a book and saying, please don't turn off the light. I've got to finish this chapter.
Clarence House, located in central London, is home to the Prince and Queen Consort, serving as a private residence and an official venue for royal engagements. Though the palace has seen many renovations and upgrades over the years, few have caused such a stir. A routine inspection of the property was planned to check for wear and tear, assessing the structural stability of the walls, ceilings, and various fixtures. These inspections are common, with technicians often called in to monitor the state of the property, ensuring everything remains in good order. However, on this occasion, the inspection uncovered something far more significant than the usual structural concerns. The renovation was part of an ongoing project to ensure Clarence House's aging infrastructure was safe and up to date, as the palace had not undergone substantial work in years. Most of the time, these kinds of inspections are mundane, with the technicians looking for things like dampness in the walls, cracks in the plaster, and checking the electrical wiring behind the scenes. The royal family, of course, pays careful attention to such details, ensuring that Buckingham Palace and other royal residences remain functional and secure. For workers, it's usually a quiet task that doesn't attract much attention, especially behind the walls of a palace that has been home to centuries of royal history. But that day, something unusual was found. As the team of technicians conducted their usual survey of Queen Camilla's private suite, they noticed an irregularity behind her bookshelf wall. At first glance, it appeared as nothing more than a slight misalignment in the wall structure, a simple defect likely caused by the passage of time. The seam between the bookshelf and the wall did not align perfectly with the surrounding plaster, but given the age of the building, it wasn't immediately alarming. It's not uncommon for old buildings like Clarence House to experience small shifts in their foundations or walls as they settle over time. Workers often dismiss these inconsistencies, thinking of them as minor, inevitable changes. However, this time, something about it didn't feel quite right. The team used their instruments to measure the area, and the readings were unexpectedly odd. The wall, though seemingly solid, displayed signs of being much less dense than they had anticipated. Behind the polished surface of the wall, which had been part of the palace's facade for decades, there seemed to be an empty cavity. It was deeper than the room's blueprint suggested, indicating there was far more to the wall than anyone had previously known. The team immediately reported their findings to senior palace officials, as per protocol, triggering a swift and highly confidential response from the palace security team. While the workers had originally planned to finish their inspection within an hour, they quickly found themselves entangled in something much more significant. Palace security arrived swiftly, and there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. What had begun as an ordinary inspection now seemed to involve something far more complex and mysterious. Behind closed doors, senior staff began to speculate about what could possibly be concealed within the walls of Clarence House, one of the most secure and storied buildings in the United Kingdom. After all, this was not just any residence. It was home to the royal family, a symbol of the British monarchy. The security team, tasked with overseeing the royal estate, quickly recognized that what they were dealing with was no minor issue. There was a clear sense that this discovery was not just a simple structural flaw or an oversight. It was something deliberate. The possibility that the irregularity in the wall could be the result of a long-forgotten construction detail, hidden passage, or even secret chamber became a more pressing concern. The irregularity was traced to what appeared to be a sealed entry point hidden behind the bookshelf, covered by the elegant drapery and ornate furniture in Queen Camilla's private suite. As they carefully examined the area, it became clear that the wall had been deliberately sealed off, and the dust accumulated at the seams suggested it had been untouched for years, perhaps even decades. This was not an ordinary construction flaw. The team was now faced with the question of why something had been hidden there in the first place. What lay behind the bookshelf wall, and why had it been concealed for so long? The inspectors, now under the supervision of palace security, decided to proceed with greater caution. As the delicate process of uncovering what lay behind the wall began, the atmosphere inside the room grew tense. No one knew what they might find. The idea that something had been intentionally hidden in one of the most public buildings in Britain, especially one so closely associated with the royal family, was difficult to grasp. Clarence House, like other royal residences, is filled with priceless treasures, historical artifacts, and personal mementos. Every room, every nook and cranny is meticulously maintained. The discovery of something hidden within the walls raised unsettling questions about who might have concealed it and why. As the team worked to move the bookshelf and carefully peel back the surface, it became clear that this was no ordinary discovery. What was behind the wall was hidden from view for a reason, and the significance of what they were about to uncover was impossible to ignore. The workers were aware that they had stumbled upon something unusual, something that could have far-reaching implications for the royal family. It wasn't just the mystery of the hidden compartment that made this discovery so important, but the potential secrets it could unveil about Queen Camilla's past and the royal family's history. The inspection, which was meant to be a quiet and routine task, had suddenly evolved into an investigation of something far more complex. As palace security took over, the entire royal family, who had been kept in the dark about the inspection, was notified of the discovery. A new layer of intrigue and curiosity was now surrounding Queen Camilla's private quarters, as the palace entered a state of heightened awareness. With each passing hour, the question loomed larger. What was hidden behind Camilla's bookshelf wall, and why had it been concealed for so long? The answers to these questions would not only affect the royal family, but also have far-reaching consequences for the monarchy's image. The secrecy surrounding the discovery added to its allure, and as word of the find began to spread, speculation about the contents behind the wall grew louder. As the palace security team arrived and the initial investigation began, the room inside Queen Camilla's private suite became charged with an unsettling energy. What had started as a simple structural inspection was rapidly turning into a search for something that had been concealed for many years. The workers and technicians who had first noticed the irregularity in the wall were now joined by security officers, all of whom were tasked with finding out exactly what lay behind the hidden compartment. As the tension in the room mounted, it became increasingly clear that this discovery was not just a small oversight or accidental finding. It was something that had been deliberately hidden away. The first step was to clear the area and move the bookshelf that had initially obscured the unusual seam in the wall. The bookshelf, a beautifully crafted piece of furniture, stood as a silent witness to whatever had been concealed behind it. As the security officers and technicians began to carefully remove the bookshelf, there was a sense that they were not just uncovering a hidden space, they were potentially unearthing something that had been intentionally left out of sight for a reason. There was a profound weight in the air, as everyone in the room understood that this was more than just a simple discovery. The process of uncovering the hidden compartment was slow and methodical. The workers were cautious, aware that they were dealing with a significant discovery. With each movement, the tension in the room grew. The faint irregularity in the wall was becoming clearer, and the more they examined it, the more it appeared to be a carefully crafted and sealed section of the wall, specifically designed to remain hidden. It was not just an accidental flaw in the building's design. It was something that had been deliberately concealed, its existence forgotten by all but a few. As they began to trace the seams of the wall, the workers noted the faint outlines of a door or panel that had been sealed shut. The dust that had accumulated along the edges of the seam suggested that it had been untouched for many years, possibly decades. The irregularity was subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. But to those familiar with the palace's layout and construction, it was an unmistakable sign that something had been deliberately hidden. This was not just another quirk of the old building. It was a secret, locked away in plain sight. The discovery quickly caught the attention of senior palace security officers, who were summoned to oversee the investigation. The atmosphere in the room shifted as the reality of what was unfolding began to sink in. What had been an ordinary structural inspection had now escalated into something much more significant, something that could have far-reaching consequences. The inspectors, now under the watchful eyes of palace security, carefully examined the area around the irregularity. They began to carefully peel back the layers of the wall, revealing what appeared to be a concealed entry point, hidden from view for many years. The wall was thicker than expected, and as the workers used their tools to probe the surface, they discovered that the cavity behind the wall was deeper than they had initially anticipated. This was no ordinary room or space. It was a hidden passageway, deliberately sealed off from the rest of the palace. The workers continued to carefully inspect the area, using specialized tools to measure the dimensions of the cavity and assess the integrity of the wall. It became increasingly clear that this was no small oversight. It was something that had been intentionally concealed, its purpose unknown. The more they uncovered, the more the sense of mystery grew. The hidden space behind the wall seemed to stretch further than expected, and the more they explored, the more questions arose. Who had sealed this passage? Why had it been hidden for so long? And most importantly, what lay beyond the wall? The possibilities seemed endless, and each new discovery only deepened the intrigue. As the inspection team continued to work, palace security officers took charge of the scene, ensuring that no unauthorized personnel could enter the room. The secrecy surrounding the discovery added to the mystery, with whispers beginning to circulate throughout the palace about what had been found. The more the team uncovered, the more they realized that they were dealing with something far more significant than a simple structural flaw. The decision was made to carefully remove the panel that had been hidden behind the bookshelf. The process was slow, and every movement was deliberate. As the panel was finally loosened from its frame, a thick gust of stale air rushed out from the hidden space. It was clear that this was a room that had not been disturbed in many years. The air was heavy with dust, and the silence in the room was deafening. It was as though space had been locked away from the world for generations, waiting to be discovered. With the panel finally removed, the workers stepped back, allowing the security team to take over. The hidden passage was now fully exposed, and what lay beyond it was a mystery. The space was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to pass through. The walls were lined with stone, and the air smelled musty, as though it had been sealed off for an incredibly long time. The workers hesitated, unsure of what they might find inside. There were no records of such a passage in the official palace blueprints, and the discovery of this secret space only deepened the sense that something far more significant was hidden beyond it. The workers and security officers stepped cautiously into the passageway, the narrow walls pressing in on them as they moved deeper into the darkness. As they ventured further into the space, they noticed that the construction of the passage was old, perhaps dating back to modifications made long ago, long before anyone could remember. There were no signs of recent activity, no footprints, no signs that anyone had been inside for years. It was as though the passage had been forgotten, its existence erased from the collective memory of the palace. The deeper they ventured, the more it became clear that this was no ordinary hidden passage. The architecture was unlike anything they had seen before, and the narrow corridor gave way to a small alcove at the end. The air grew colder, and the silence was broken only by the faint sound of their footsteps on the stone floor. The alcove, though small, seemed to hold something significant. In the dim light, they could make out the outline of an object at the far end of the passage. It was large and heavy, and it seemed out of place in this narrow, musty space. The workers approached it slowly, unsure of what they would find. At first, they thought it might be an old piece of furniture or a forgotten relic from the palace's history. But as they drew closer, it became clear that it was something far more significant. It was a chest, weathered by time and covered in dust. The chest was large and rectangular, its surface worn with age. The wood was warped and the iron fittings were corroded, but the lock remained intact, as though it had been sealed shut with great purpose. The workers exchanged uneasy glances, wondering who had placed this chest here and why it had been kept hidden for so long. The discovery of the chest sent a ripple of excitement and anxiety through the team. This was no ordinary object. It was something that had been deliberately concealed, its contents hidden away from the world. The workers knew that whatever was inside this chest could be something far more significant than anything they had anticipated. The decision was made to carefully open the chest, but the lock proved to be stubborn, resisting all attempts to open it with ordinary tools. As the security officers discussed their options, the tension in the room grew. The chest was a symbol of the mystery that had been unfolding in the hidden passage, and its contents could hold the key to understanding why this space had been concealed in the first place. The mystery deepened with each passing minute, as the team prepared to tackle the chest and uncover the secrets it contained. This was no longer just a routine inspection. It had become an investigation into something far deeper and more personal. The moment the chest was finally opened, the room fell into a deep, almost reverential silence. What had begun as a seemingly ordinary structural inspection had evolved into an investigation that could change the course of royal history. The contents of the chest were not what anyone had expected. Far from being filled with relics or treasures, the chest contained bundles of fragile parchment, old letters, and journals, items that seemed far more personal and intimate than anything that might have been left behind in such a hidden location. The chest itself had been carefully placed in the alcove, its position strategic, as though it had been intentionally left in that particular spot, waiting to be uncovered. The condition of the chest suggested that it had not been disturbed for decades, perhaps even longer. The wood was warped with age, and the metal fittings had corroded, but the lock remained firmly intact, as though it had been sealed shut with a purpose. It was clear that whoever had placed these items in the chest had intended for them to remain hidden for a very long time. As the workers carefully removed the papers from the chest, they found that the items were carefully arranged, as though someone had made a deliberate effort to preserve them. The papers were delicate, the ink faded with time, and the journals were leather-bound with ornate designs. It was immediately apparent that these were not the kinds of items one would expect to find in a royal storage room or an archive. These were personal reflections, private thoughts, something far more intimate than any official royal documents. The first few letters that were uncovered were tied with faded ribbons. The handwriting was unmistakable, delicate, and flowing, with each letter carrying the weight of a personal message that had never been meant for public consumption. These were not the official letters or memos that had been carefully curated for historical records. These were unsent letters, personal musings, and reflections that spoke to the heart of the writer's inner world. The more the workers sifted through the contents of the chest, the more they realized that what they had uncovered was not just a forgotten stash of personal belongings. These were pieces of history, intimate pieces of history that had been hidden away for a reason. As the team began to sort through the papers, the first realization that struck them was how personal the contents were. The letters, many of which had never been sent, spoke of emotions, experiences, and reflections that had been kept private, perhaps even from those closest to the writer. Some of the letters were addressed to family members, others to unnamed confidants, but each one was filled with raw emotion and deeply personal thoughts. These were not the kinds of letters that would have been included in any public archive or royal record. They were the kinds of letters that one might write in moments of vulnerability, when no one else was watching. What made the discovery even more compelling was the fact that the journals found in the chest were filled with the same kind of deeply personal reflections. These were not the polished, public-facing accounts of royal life that we have become accustomed to seeing. These were private musings, full of vulnerability and unguarded emotions. The handwriting in the journals was familiar to those who had studied royal history, and it quickly became clear to the team that the journals belonged to someone whose voice had once captivated the world, Princess Diana. As the workers carefully turned the pages of the journals, it became obvious that the entries were not merely records of daily life or royal duties. They were reflections of someone who had lived under intense public scrutiny, someone who had often been misunderstood and judged by the media. The journals spoke of loneliness, isolation, and the deep emotional toll that came with living in the spotlight. There were confessions of pain, moments of self-doubt, and glimpses into the struggles Diana had faced behind the scenes. These were not the kinds of things that had been shared with the public during her lifetime. These were personal truths that had been buried for years, hidden away behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, and now they were being uncovered, one page at a time. The realization that these journals had been hidden away in such a secretive manner added another layer of intrigue to the discovery. It was clear that someone had gone to great lengths to ensure that these writings would not be found. The chest, which had been placed behind a secret panel in the wall of Camilla's private suite, was a deliberate attempt to conceal Diana's most personal thoughts. But why? Why had these writings been hidden in such a way? Was it a choice made to protect Diana's memory, or was there something more sinister at play? As the workers continued to carefully handle the fragile pages, they began to piece together a picture of a woman who had been both beloved and misunderstood. Diana had often been portrayed as a tragic figure, a princess trapped in a gilded cage. But these journals revealed a different side of her, a side that was rarely seen by the public. The writings were not filled with bitterness or anger, but rather with a quiet resignation. Diana's words revealed a woman who had come to terms with the harsh realities of her life, but who had also held on to a sense of hope, however fleeting, that one day her truth would be known. One of the most striking aspects of the journals was the recurring theme of Diana's struggle with her public image. She wrote about the pressure to conform to the royal family's expectations, the constant scrutiny of the media, and the emotional toll of living a life that was constantly in the public eye. But what made these writings particularly poignant was the fact that they were not just reflections on her own struggles. They were also reflections on the other people in her life, particularly her relationship with Camilla. While the entries did not explicitly mention Camilla by name, the implication was clear. Diana's words hinted at a deep sense of betrayal and heartache, a feeling that she had been overshadowed by someone else. It was impossible to ignore the fact that Diana's private writings seemed to reveal a woman who had felt abandoned and alienated by the very institution she had married into. The shadow of Camilla loomed over many of the entries, not as a direct accusation, but as a constant presence in Diana's life. The discovery of these writings behind Camilla's own private bedroom wall added a layer of irony to the situation. It was as though history had come full circle, and Diana's voice, once silenced, was now speaking louder than ever. As the journals and letters were carefully examined, it became clear that these were not just personal musings. They were pieces of a larger story, a story that had been obscured for many years. Diana's voice had been deliberately silenced during her lifetime, but now it had found a way to break free. The writings were not just a reflection of her own inner struggles. They were also a testament to the challenges faced by the royal family itself. The monarchy had always been an institution that valued privacy and control, but Diana's writings revealed cracks in that carefully constructed facade. For the workers and security officers who had uncovered the chest, the discovery was nothing short of extraordinary. They had come to inspect the structure of the palace, but they had unwittingly uncovered something far more significant, an intimate and raw look into the life of one of the most iconic figures of the 20th century. The chest had not only revealed forgotten letters and journals, but it had also brought to light a powerful story that had been hidden away for decades. As the discovery began to make its way through the royal corridors, the implications became even clearer. What had been meant as a quiet, routine inspection had now become a full-scale investigation into the hidden truths of the royal family. The chest, and the personal writings it contained, had become a symbol of the monarchy's struggle to control its narrative and preserve its carefully curated image. But now, with Diana's voice emerging from behind the walls, the palace found itself facing a challenge that no amount of public relations could hide. The moment the chest was finally opened, a palpable tension filled the air. The anticipation of what might be inside had built up over the course of the investigation. And now, as the contents of the chest were slowly revealed, it was clear that this was not just a historical discovery. It was a deeply personal one, with the potential to shake the foundations of the monarchy itself. Inside the chest were bundles of carefully tied parchment, yellowed with age, and several leather-bound journals. These were not the items one would expect to find in a royal archive, nor were they the kinds of artifacts typically stored behind the walls of Buckingham Palace. The chest's contents were personal, intimate, and unguarded. It was a stark contrast to the public image that had been carefully crafted around the royal family. What the team had uncovered was far more than just forgotten documents or old records. It was a treasure trove of private reflections, personal letters, and intimate thoughts. The team handling the chest were immediately struck by the sense of deliberate preservation. The letters and journals were not thrown haphazardly into the chest. Each item had been carefully arranged, as though someone had gone to great lengths to ensure that they would remain protected and hidden for as long as possible. The ink on the letters was faded, the handwriting delicate, but still legible. The journals, which appeared to be centuries old, were bound in ornate leather, their edges gilded, suggesting they were crafted with care and meant to withstand the passage of time. These were not the kind of writings one would expect to find in a royal residence. These were personal documents, hidden away and preserved with a purpose. As the contents were carefully sifted through, it quickly became apparent that the journals and letters belonged to none other than Princess Diana. Her handwriting, unmistakable to anyone familiar with her personal notes, filled the pages of the journals, and the familiar cadence of her words became apparent as soon as the team began to read. What struck them most was not just the content of the letters, but the tone and emotion behind them. These were not the polished, carefully crafted public statements that Diana had made throughout her life. These were raw, unfiltered reflections, letters and journal entries written in moments of solitude and vulnerability, not intended for public consumption. Diana had always been an enigmatic figure, a woman who had been both adored by millions and vilified by the press. Her life was lived under constant scrutiny, and the pressure of being in the public eye had undoubtedly taken its toll. These writings revealed a side of Diana that few had ever seen, a woman who had been struggling with isolation, loneliness, and the emotional strain of living a life that was constantly under the microscope. She had been the princess who captivated the world, but these letters showed the human side of her, a woman who had often felt misunderstood and trapped by the very institution she had married into. What made the discovery even more significant was the location of these writings. They had been hidden behind the walls of Camilla's private suite in Buckingham Palace, a fact that added a layer of complexity to the entire situation. Why had Diana's most personal writings been concealed in such a way? Why had they been hidden behind a wall in a room belonging to Camilla, the woman who had been the subject of so much speculation and controversy throughout Diana's life? The symbolism of this discovery was not lost on anyone. The very fact that Diana's private thoughts had been hidden behind the walls of Camilla's room raised questions about the motives behind the concealment. Was it an attempt to keep Diana's voice silenced, or was it an effort to protect her memory from the public eye? As the workers continued to sift through the contents of the chest, they began to uncover even more personal reflections. The letters were addressed to family members, friends, and confidants, many of whom had been close to Diana during her lifetime. The tone of the letters varied, with some expressing love and affection, while others conveyed frustration and a deep sense of emotional turmoil. Diana's words were filled with the kind of raw honesty that one might find in a private diary, not in a letter intended for public consumption. She spoke of the difficulties of being in the royal family, of the pressures of maintaining a public image, and of the emotional toll of living a life that was constantly in the spotlight. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was addressed to her sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, and it spoke of Diana's love for them, her hopes for their futures, and the deep sense of sadness she felt at being separated from them. In it, she expressed her desire for them to grow up free from the burden of public scrutiny, to live their lives without the constant pressure that she had faced. The letter was a poignant reminder of the deep love Diana had for her children and the sacrifices she had made in her own life to try and protect them from the harsh realities of royal life. But not all of the letters were filled with love and affection. Some of the writings revealed Diana's growing sense of frustration with the royal family, particularly with her relationship with Camilla. While Diana did not mention Camilla by name in her writings, the implication was clear. The tension between the two women had been well documented during Diana's lifetime, and these letters seemed to offer a glimpse into the emotional toll that the relationship had taken on Diana. The pain of feeling overshadowed, the feeling of being unloved and unappreciated, were themes that ran through many of the entries. It was evident that Diana had struggled with the complexities of her role as Princess of Wales and the emotional weight that came with it. The journals also revealed a deeper side of Diana, a side that had been hidden from the public for many years. They spoke of her dreams, her fears, and her longing for a life that was more than just public appearances and royal duties. Diana had often been portrayed as a tragic figure, a woman whose life was marked by heartbreak and scandal. But these writings offered a different perspective, one that showed her as a complex, multidimensional woman who had been grappling with the same challenges and struggles that many people face in their own lives. As the team carefully handled the fragile pages, they began to realize the significance of what they had uncovered. These were not just personal reflections. They were pieces of a larger story, a story that had been buried for years, hidden behind the walls of Buckingham Palace. The discovery of these writings, hidden in such a secretive manner, raised serious questions about the monarchy's attempts to control its own narrative. Why had Diana's most personal thoughts been kept hidden for so long? Who had decided that these writings should be sealed away, and why? And perhaps most importantly, why had they been hidden behind the walls of Camilla's private suite? The chest and its contents were not just relics of the past. They were living, breathing pieces of history. They had the power to change the way the public viewed Diana, and by extension, the royal family itself. The writings offered a glimpse into a side of Diana that had been concealed for decades, a side that spoke of pain, vulnerability, and a desire for truth. The discovery of these writings, so carefully hidden and so deeply personal, had the potential to unravel the carefully constructed image of the royal family. The implications of this discovery were far-reaching. What had begun as a routine structural inspection had now become a full-scale investigation into the hidden truths of the royal family. The chest and the writings it contained had the potential to alter the public's perception of the monarchy and its legacy. The question now was not just about what had been found, but what would happen next. Would the palace choose to confront the truth head-on, or would it attempt to bury it once again? As the team of workers began to sift through the fragile letters and journals, it was clear that these weren't just old documents. They were pieces of Diana's soul, reflections of a woman who had lived under the intense scrutiny of the world for most of her life. The personal nature of these writings, the raw honesty they contained, made them far more significant than any of the artifacts typically found in royal archives. They were unfiltered, intimate, and deeply emotional, offering a glimpse into the private struggles of the princess who had captivated the world's attention. But it wasn't just the content of the letters that made the discovery so explosive. It was the location. The fact that Diana's personal writings had been concealed behind the walls of Camilla's private suite added a layer of complexity that couldn't be ignored. Why had these documents been hidden in such a way? What did it mean that they had been sealed behind a wall, out of sight for decades? And why had they been hidden specifically in Camilla's bedroom? The symbolism of this discovery was hard to ignore. Diana and Camilla had been at the center of a long-standing rivalry, a rivalry that had played out in the public eye for years. While Diana had been the beloved princess, Camilla had often been painted as the villain, someone who had broken up Diana's marriage to Prince Charles and had become the new woman in the prince's life. The tension between the two women had been well documented, and the idea that Diana's personal writings were hidden behind a wall in Camilla's room added an almost theatrical element to the entire situation. It seemed as though history had conspired to bring the two women together once again, but this time the roles were reversed. Camilla was no longer the one hiding in the shadows. She was now the one caught in the crossfire of a secret long buried. For the royal family, the discovery posed a number of questions that needed urgent answers. How could they explain the existence of the hidden letters? Why had they remained concealed for so long? And perhaps most importantly, what did it mean for the monarchy that Diana's voice, her private, unfiltered voice, was now exposed for the world to hear? In the days following the discovery, the royal family was thrown into disarray. Meetings were held behind closed doors as advisors, legal experts, and courtiers debated the best course of action. The monarchy had long been adept at managing crises, but this was a different kind of crisis. This wasn't about a scandal or a fleeting controversy. It was about the resurrection of a deeply personal and painful chapter in the royal family's history. It was about Diana's voice, a voice that had been silenced by the palace for years, now speaking louder than ever before. King Charles, who had already been under immense pressure in recent years due to his own complicated relationship with Diana and his marriage to Camilla, was faced with a particularly difficult challenge. The discovery of Diana's writings threatened to reopen old wounds, not just for him, but for his sons, Prince William and Prince Harry as well. The letters spoke of Diana's love for her children, her longing to protect them from the pressures of royal life, and her deep sense of isolation within the royal family. The public revelation of these intimate thoughts was sure to have an impact on how William and Harry viewed their own family and their roles within the monarchy. For William, the discovery of his mother's writings was a deeply emotional moment. He had spent much of his life trying to reconcile his public role as the future king with his private feelings about his mother's death and the turmoil that had marked her final years. To discover these personal reflections, hidden for so long, was both a gift and a burden. On the one hand, he now had access to a side of his mother that he had never fully known. On the other hand, he was once again confronted with the painful reality of her life, of the loneliness, the heartache, and the deep sense of abandonment she had felt within the royal family. For Harry, the reaction was equally emotional, but took on a different tone. Harry had always been more outspoken about his struggles with the royal family and the pressures that came with being in the public eye. The discovery of Diana's personal writings only reinforced his belief that much of his mother's story had been manipulated or concealed by the palace. He was frustrated by the idea that her private thoughts had been hidden away, and he felt a deep sense of urgency to share them with the world. For Harry, the uncovering of these letters was not just about honoring his mother's memory. It was about confronting the narrative that had been constructed around her life and legacy. The reactions of William and Harry to the discovery were indicative of the growing divide between them and the rest of the royal family. As brothers, they had always shared a strong bond, but the revelation of these private writings had forced them to confront the complicated dynamics of their family in a new light. William, ever the more measured of the two, took a cautious approach to the situation. He wanted to ensure that the public release of these letters was handled with care and respect for his mother's memory. He knew that once the letters were made public, they would be subject to intense scrutiny, and he didn't want Diana's legacy to be reduced to tabloid fodder. Harry, on the other hand, was less concerned with the potential fallout. He felt that the letters were an essential part of Diana's story, and that they needed to be shared with the world, regardless of the consequences. For Harry, the discovery was a moment of clarity. It was an opportunity to finally confront the truth about his mother's life, and to ensure that her voice was heard, no matter the cost. As the debate over what to do with Diana's writings raged on behind palace walls, the public's reaction was swift and overwhelming. The discovery quickly became global news, with media outlets scrambling to cover every detail of the royal family's latest crisis. The fact that the letters had been hidden for so long only added to the intrigue, with many speculating about the reasons for their concealment. Some believed that the monarchy had deliberately kept Diana's writings from the public eye in order to protect the family's image, while others suspected that the letters contained secrets that the royal family had hoped to keep buried forever.